And so today what we're going to do is go over the ways in which scientists and biologists classify all living things that are on Earth. But before we hop into the lesson, I wanted to ask a question. How many species do you believe to be living on Earth today? And so in total, we have 8.7 million species that live on Earth today. And so in the early 18th century, scientists began the process of organizing animals, plants, bacteria, and all other living things into groups based on their specific characteristics. This branch of biology that deals with the naming of organisms and classifying them into groups is known as taxonomy. And today, scientists can even push further their understanding of classifying organisms because of the advances in biotechnology, the use of DNA analysis, and the combination of internal and external structure analysis of organisms with their DNA analysis to better classify them and see the relationships between organisms and how closely related they are. And so the guy who came up with the entire classification system in the early 18th century was known as Carl Linnaeus. And in his classification system, he put organisms in based off of different groups. And so the groups go as follow: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And I know you don't see family in the photo, however, it's not necessarily relevant in today's level of science. However, the highest level of the classification system is known as domain, with only 3 different groups: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And those deal with the specific types of cells that organisms may have. The next level is the kingdom level, which has 6 specific groups. You have eubacteria, archaeobacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. And amongst these different levels, and so in class we're going to kind of do a 3 versus 6 because the old classification system relied on the kingdom classification, whereas in today's age we rely on the domain level of classification. And we'll explain a little bit more on why we changed the classification of organisms. And so I want to get into the very specific characteristics that we scientists use in order to classify all of the living organisms in the world. And so there are 5 very specific classification characteristics that scientists look for: the cell type, method of reproduction, nutrition type, the presence or an absence of a cell wall, and the motility. And each of these different characteristics has a little bit of depth into them, so we're going to cover them more specifically and explain and give some examples of the types of organisms you would see. And so first, the cell type, there are 2 specific cell type groups. You have prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are more commonly known as bacteria, and they have no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. They are extremely very small, and they divide by using binary fission. Whereas eukaryotic cells, or more commonly known as plant and animal cells, have membrane-bound organelles. They can divide by using of mitosis. They have linear DNA, and they are unicellular, but also they can be multicellular organisms like us, the humans, okay? And so prokaryotics, on the other hand, they have circular DNA. It's nothing to get boggled down or confused about. There are just some differences amongst the groups. The next type are method of reproduction. And so there are 2 main types of reproduction. There's asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. We humans do sexual reproduction. You pick your mate, you have sex, And then you then have a fertilized egg, a zygote, that turns into an embryo that will then later become a baby, and then that's how we get another little human. Whereas asexual reproduction is generally what prokaryotes do, but as you can see in the diagram, some animals like starfish and hydras can do that. Essentially, they can cut a piece of themselves and allow that to then grow and cause for another starfish or hydra to become from the small cut piece. And so the next characteristic is their modes of nutrition. Are they heterotrophic or autotrophic? And so heterotrophic individuals like us are organisms that have to eat their food or get their food from somewhere else. And so we eat plants and meats, whereas plants use the process of photosynthesis to produce their own energy and food, which is known as being autotrophic. And so these two characteristics greatly differ in the sense that some organisms, like specific animals, can do autotrophic, whereas majority of the animals, like us and a lot of our domesticated animals, cats and dogs, are heterotrophic. And so the next type of characteristic we're going to look for are the presence or absence of cell wall. And so we know that humans, again, do not have cell walls. We are animal cells, so we have a very mushy type of cell. Whereas plant cells do have a cell wall, and they're very rigid and box-like. If you can see the image, you can kind of see how it looks like a hexagon, or it looks very rigid and box-like. But the interesting thing is that even though plants have cell walls, bacteria have cell walls as well. And so since bacteria have cell walls, it kind of contributes to, or it kind of confuses a little bit of the classification when we're trying to organize plants. However, because plants have membrane-bound organelles, they are eukaryotic type cells. And lastly, what we're going to go over are whether or not the organisms can move, and this is classified as motility. And so organisms, even bacteria, have specific structures on the cellular level that allow them to move from place to place. We, humans, and a lot of other animals have limbs, so our legs and others' paws allow them to move, whereas cells need something a little bit more complex or a little bit more specific in order to help them move. And so these 5 classification characteristics should be used in your presentation when going and researching your specific species. If you understand that these characteristics are what led to the classic Linnaeus classification system, then you should have, in a sense, a whole grasp on how we kind of organize species. And so again, have a great day, and make sure that you study and watch some of the extra videos if you need some extra further understanding. And we're going to work in class on this a little bit more.